This video is brought to you by Grainger Warranty, your #1 online source for factory-backed extended warranties in the country.
Do different driving modes really have an impact on fuel economy? Well, that's what we're going to find out today, because we've got our new long-term Honda Passport TrailSport that's got a bunch of different drive settings, and we're going to try a couple to find out in the real world, does changing that setting change how much you pay at the pump. So here's a challenge. We're starting here at a gas station, and we're going to use our 2-click method to fill up the tank of this Honda Passport. So here's how it works. I fill the tank until it clicks, and I've got my timer and start. And now we're going to wait 30 seconds so we get a consistent top off for every test. Then we're going to drive 50 miles round trip from Boulder up to Berthoud and back and see what the result is, and do it again in a couple different drive modes. For our first run, if you look down here, this is the drive mode selector we are talking about. Now, this Passport has a ton of different settings, from sport to normal to econ to snow to trail to sand to tow. But in this first test, we're going to run it in the default setting, which is normal. Now, this test may seem kind of silly. Of course, the car is going to do worse in sport than it would in normal, but I'm actually not so sure, because yes, sport modes typically change steering feel a little bit, maybe they change throttle responsiveness, but when you're actually cruising down the road, especially if you're trying to match the same acceleration from time to time, I have a feeling that the results may be more similar than you think, and that the mode selection doesn't have that much of an impact. Well, that's what we're here to find out today. Now, our test loop is 25 miles each direction. We're going to repeat it twice right in the middle of the day, so traffic should be about the same for both tests. We are at a mile above sea level here in Colorado, and it's currently 82 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Now, we're going to try to keep it as consistent as possible, same 25 miles each way on the same day, using the same exact pump even. Now, this Passport TrailSport doesn't have the greatest fuel economy rating from the EPA. 18 city, 23 highway, 20 combined. And because we've got some country roads, we've got a little bit of highway, we've got some city driving, I'm aiming for that 20 mpg number. It's not super high, but fingers crossed we can get there in this new Passport.
Now, if you plan on buying any new vehicle like this Honda Passport and driving lots of miles, and you want to save some money, we highly recommend you get a Grainger extended warranty, because with a Grainger warranty, you can save money, fix your vehicle with OEM parts and factory trained technicians. And if you want that, check out the link in the description below.
So this Honda is a phenomenal vehicle, and it does a lot of things really well, and it does some things not so well. This new Passport, especially this one, the TrailSport, I think is the most exciting Honda of recent years, because Honda is actually embracing some all-wheel drive off-road goodness, which they haven't in previous generations, which is crazy because previous generations have had this iVTM4 all-wheel drive system, which has been phenomenal, but then they don't have the tires, they don't have the tow hooks, they don't have the skid plates, but this one does. So there's some really cool stuff, and I love the design. I love how kind of Bronco sporty it is. But then when you combine that with these off-road tires and the naturally aspirated 3.5 liter V6, the fuel economy numbers definitely suffer. However, under the right circumstances, it can be pretty efficient. Now, we're only 15 miles into this journey, but we're doing 26.6 mpg, which is pretty good. That's a mix of mostly country back roads and a little bit of highway with some city sprinkled in there. Now, when I've got this thing in the normal drive mode, it does have auto start stop, and I'd love to hear your opinion. Obviously, when auto start stop started coming on the scene 10 plus years ago, you know, people hated it. And I know some people still really hate it and are very adamant about pushing that button off. For me, I really don't mind it. You know, you get so used to that sensation. Sometimes it's a little annoying when the AC gets a little warm, but for the most part, I just don't mind auto start stop. Now, when we do this next loop in the sport mode, it automatically turns auto start stop off. And it's one of those things where it doesn't seem like it changes fuel economy that much, but from the data I've read, if you stop for more than 5 or 10 seconds at a time, there is an actual benefit to those start-stop systems. Plus, when you consider that, you know, the starter motors have been beefed up and upgraded on these engines to last long term, there's not really a big disadvantage to auto start-stop unless you don't like that sensation, which is fair enough. But yeah, 26 so far. Now, we do have some more country driving to go till we get to our turnaround spot at the ranch. Well, we made it to the turnaround spot. And what's great about this route, it's exactly 25 miles each way. Now, granted, it's not 100 or 200 miles, which would make for a better test, but for 50 miles round trip, we should get a good baseline understanding of what kind of fuel economy we're getting. Now, in normal mode, this route, 25.1 mpg average is what the car is saying, but let's turn around, head back to the gas station, and find out for sure. We just made it back to the pump here, and let's see the results. The Honda actually agrees with GPS. It's exactly a 50-mile round trip on the dot, which is cool. And in normal mode, the car says we've averaged 25.3 mpg. So let's go to the pump and see if that's true. So just like on our first fill up, we're going to use a 2-click method. Now, this is one of the most controversial things we do at the company. I've talked to a bunch of engineers, and they've actually pretty much approved this process as being a consistent way to test, but I'm not sure I would do this every day. 3, 2, 1.
Clean, protein-packed entrees.
All right, final results. We drove 50 miles. We're dividing it by 1.629 gallons used. Wow. 30.69? That's way more than the car said we did originally. Might just do one more click to make sure that's accurate, but that's a really, really good result. Really, really good. Just checking to make sure that pump's not way off. No, not really. Didn't take any more, so wow, really good result. All right, let's keep going. So we're back on the road in sport mode. Now there's a big discussion at the office whether or not to do this in normal or eco or any of the other modes. We decided sport mode because it seems more cars have a sport mode than an eco mode, but maybe we'll do this test again if you guys think it's interesting in the eco mode as well. So same exact route, it's a little bit later in the day, but it's still exactly 82 degrees and still no wind, which is perfect for our day today. Now here's the thing. So sport mode changes a little bit depending on the make and model, but typically what it does is try to lock you in to a lower gear to increase those RPM. So if you do have to pass somebody, the engine is more responsive and ready to go. It also, in most cars, stiffens up the steering response a little bit, gives you more throttle tip in, changes the transmission calibration. There's a whole bunch of stuff sport mode can do. And it's interesting, like in some of the more modern BMWs, especially the ride quality, if you put the car in a sport mode, it'll stiffen up the dampers as hard as it can immediately, make you feel sporty, and then actually relax them a few minutes later because statistically people hate that rock hard ride. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the Passport TrailSport. So in sport mode, the one thing I am noticing is it's typically holding a gear lower than we did in the normal mode. So if the car could be in 7th or 8th, sometimes it's running in 5 or 6, which is interesting, which kind of makes sense. And then the red line is more pronounced in sport mode, and I think the steering's gotten a little heavier, but I'll be curious to see what impact this is actually going to have on our real world MPG. Now, a couple other interesting things about this Passport TrailSport. So Honda, with this car, has decided to stick tried and true with their naturally aspirated V6s. So this is an interesting category. Honda will tell you that this vehicle competes with vehicles like the Atlas Cross Sport, which is a 2-liter turbo, Jeep Grand Cherokee, which is a 2-liter turbo hybrid, potentially a V6 in that model. Potentially there's some cross shopping with like the RAV4 or the Highlander, which are now 4 cylinders, right? Ford Explorer maybe on the larger end, 4-cylinder turbo. So it's kind of cool that Honda stuck with the naturally aspirated V6, and we are living in a weird world where that's like an enthusiast engine now. Oh, you didn't get turbos and a 4-cylinder? You are an enthusiast choice, but 3.5 liter V6, 285 horsepower in this generation, just over 260 pound-feet of torque. It's a pretty quiet, responsive engine. But what makes this car so special is the IVTM4 system. Now, we need to do some more testing on this system, but typically, historically, the Honda all-wheel drive systems that come equipped with IVTM4 are very, very, very impressive. This one, on a roller test, was a little bit less impressive than some previous generations, but what's cool about this TrailSport, like we mentioned, are all the off-road goodies. It only has 8 inches of ground clearance, which is not quite enough for regular trail use, but the all-wheel drive system is great, especially with these all-terrain tires. So if you wanted to tackle snow, mild trails, you want to get to the cool camp spots, there's a good shot that a Passport TrailSport is going to get you where you need to go. Plus, we got a tow hitch on the back of this thing, so you can tow about 5,000 pounds, which is okay. There's just a lot to like about this car, and there's something that not a lot of people talk about, someone mentioned this in the previous video, is just the width of the front end of this thing. It's a very wide car. So if you got someone next to you, you don't feel like you're close up next to them. You actually have a huge center console. It feels very Ridgeline-y, granted, similar platform. And it almost feels almost full-size trucky with how far you are away from your passenger. So very roomy car from a width standpoint. It's just kind of the perfect size. It's like you took a Bronco Sport, you stuck it in the oven, and it kind of went woof, right? The design's very similar to the Bronco Sport. It kind of just poofs out a little bit. But it's the right size, I think, for most families. I just wish that it came with the hybrid option, because as much as I like this NAV6, you know, the EPA numbers are a little bit less than I think some people would want cross-shopping this with like a Highlander hybrid or even like a new Palisade hybrid potentially. But anyway, the first result was very impressive, so let's see what happens when we get to the turnaround. Right now we're averaging about 23.1, 23.2 mpg, so a little bit less than we did on the first round at this point, but we'll get to turn around and back to the station and figure out what the real numbers are. So we're almost back to the gas station from our loop in sport mode, and at least according to the car, it has done considerably worse. 21.6. The big differences are I'm noticing no start-stop when you come to a stop, and then also the transmission shift points, and also it downshifts through the gears as you slow down, which is a little, kind of an odd experience in like a family hauling crossover. But the real test is what is the pump going to say. So we're gonna fill up at the same pump we've been doing for the previous few fill-ups, and we'll find out here in a sec. Right now the car's saying 21.5 in the sport mode. All right, here we go. Filling her up. All right, so that's 1.6 gallons before the 30-second click. So I got my timer going. All right, so final result, 50 miles driven divided by 1.979 gallons used, 25. So we lost, what, 5-ish mpg in a 50-mile loop. That is pretty crazy.
Now, before we end things off, we're gonna do one more loop in eco mode just to see how that compares to normal and sport. Find out if we get a different number. All right, our trip odometer is reset, and we're gonna go ahead and switch into eco mode. Driving the Passport TrailSport in eco mode, everything is very quiet and toned down, so obviously it's going to do the opposite of what happened when we went from normal mode to sport mode. Instead of those shift points being a little later on and it holding gears longer and the throttle being a little quicker, everything is toned down. So this is definitely not the most exciting of all the loops, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being the most efficient. Now, our trip computer is saying 28.5 mpg, so it is on the higher end of what we've been seeing here, but also what we've seen at the pump has been quite a bit different from the trip computer because this is still a pretty new vehicle, not that many miles on it yet. So I'm not sure that that trip computer has enough data to be as accurate as it will be at some point in the future. So we'll see what it says when we actually get to the pump. Our MPG loop is done just like that, as before, 50 miles exactly. So we'll fill up and get our calculation. So once again, in normal mode, we got around 30 MPG, in sport mode, about 25. So if all is worked out, we should very likely see a better number, and that's a pretty fast fill up. So we'll wait 30 seconds, top off, and do our calculation. Not too bad. Let's see. So 50 miles divided by 1.715 is right around 30. So eco mode ended up doing a pretty similar number within a margin of error, I would say, to normal mode. But sport mode definitely made a big difference. And that makes sense because in the normal mode, the Passport is trying to be in a higher gear and keep the RPM down, and the auto stop start is still working. The difference in sport mode is that it's revving out quite a bit more and not using auto stop start. So between normal and eco, not a big difference, but if you're in sport mode all the time, it will have an impact on how much you end up paying at the pump. So that's all for this video. Pretty interesting results that we got here. Let us know what you think down in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.